Rachel hadn't planned to check her email that Saturday. She was in the kitchen, still in her robe, helping her granddaughter with a cardboard solar system project. They were halfway through painting Saturn's rings when her phone buzzed with a new notification. Subject line: Leadership Transition, Ops Department. Her thumb hovered. Something in her stomach turned cold. The email was brief. Too brief for 27 years of service. Effective immediately, the operations team would report to Vanessa Green, who had consistently demonstrated strategic excellence and a future-oriented mindset. Rachel read it twice, then a third time, slower. There was no mention of her name. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just a shift. A silent removal. She set the phone down without saying anything and returned to helping her granddaughter glue Jupiter into place. But later, when the house was quiet and the dishes were done, Rachel sat at the kitchen table alone. Her daughter had offered to stay the night, but Rachel had insisted she go. She needed the silence. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the past year, how ideas she'd submitted went unacknowledged until Vanessa repeated them louder, how Vanessa's mistakes became learning moments, but Rachel's accuracy was labeled rigid. How the praise in meetings now always flowed upward, never outward. It wasn't sudden. It was erosion. The following Monday, she arrived at the office before anyone else, as always. The fluorescent lights flickered on as she walked down the familiar hall. Her cubicle was untouched, but something in the air had shifted, like walking into a room where someone had just whispered your name. At 9:03 a.m., Vanessa appeared in heels that clicked too sharply for such a quiet hallway. She greeted Rachel with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know this transition might feel unexpected," she said, pulling a chair uninvited. "But I'm confident we can find new rhythms. I'm looking for agility, fresh thinking, and honestly, less attachment to legacy systems." Rachel said nothing for a long moment. Then, with her usual calm, she nodded. "I understand." Vanessa tapped her fingers on the desk and leaned closer. "I've been told you're very detail-oriented." "That's good, but don't get stuck in the weeds. We're moving fast now." And just like that, she was gone. Rachel sat still, hands folded. Detail-oriented. That was the word they used now. Once, it had meant she was reliable. Now it meant she was in the way. That evening, Rachel walked home slower than usual. The late winter wind bit through her coat, but she didn't mind. The cold gave her something real to feel. She passed the small bookstore where she used to take her daughter after school. It was closed now. Everything was closing or changing. At home, she fed the cat, made tea, and stood by the window long after the sky turned dark. In the reflection, she saw a woman with silver at her temples and steady hands. A woman who had given her best years to a place that now called her a legacy system. And something inside her, something still, and sharp, and long ignored, shifted. She opened her laptop. Not to write a resignation, but to begin documenting everything. Because she had just realized, they didn't expect her to fight. And that would be their mistake. The folder started as a simple desktop document named Operations Notes. Nothing suspicious. Nothing bold. Just spreadsheets, memos, and timestamps, things Rachel had always kept, but never for this reason. Each evening, after the office emptied out, she'd stay a little longer. Not to finish work, but to watch. To listen. To understand. Vanessa, for all her charm, was transparent. She thrived in the spotlight, on stages, in open-floor meetings, in LinkedIn posts that quoted leadership books she hadn't finished reading. But under the glitter, she was frantic. Every decision carried an edge of desperation. She triple-checked forecasts, rehearsed talking points before executive calls, and snapped at minor mistakes like they were personal attacks. Rachel saw the pattern. Vanessa wasn't cruel by nature. She was afraid. Afraid of being discovered as someone in over her head. Someone who had been promoted too quickly, with too little. And fear made people sloppy. It began with a minor inventory discrepancy. Vanessa submitted a monthly report with inflated shipment volumes to look proactive. Rachel quietly fixed it before finance saw the numbers. She didn't ask for thanks. She didn't even mention it. She just saved the original version and moved on. At home, Rachel's routine shifted. Her daughter, Lily, noticed it one weekend. "You've been quieter than usual, Mom. Everything okay at work?" Rachel gave a soft smile. "Things are changing. I'm just adjusting." Lily didn't press. She had her own worries, a job, a toddler, a pending mortgage. But she watched her mother for a moment longer, then said, "Just don't forget who you are when everything else starts shifting." Rachel didn't forget. In fact, she was remembering things she'd buried, how often she had cleaned up after others without credit. How many times she'd swallowed her voice to keep the team cohesive. How quietly she had accepted being skipped over, passed around, and now, quietly pushed aside. One evening, she sat in her apartment with a cup of ginger tea and opened a fresh document titled "Patterns of Inconsistency, Leadership Review, Private." She didn't plan to send it to anyone. Not yet. It included email trails where Vanessa missed approvals and blamed others. Project timelines that had been padded to cover her own delays. Complaints from 2 interns about conflicting instructions. Slack messages filled with vague directives and deflections. But Rachel's tone wasn't bitter. It was factual. Calm. Meticulous. She knew that explosions got attention, but erosion got results. At work, she played the part perfectly. She offered to train Vanessa's assistant, gently giving her just enough direction to raise questions, not answers. When reports came late, she never accused, just asked, "Would you like help interpreting the data next time?" Vanessa began holding more meetings. More video calls. More messaging threads. Her energy was everywhere and effective nowhere. Meanwhile, Rachel watched, adjusted, and waited. In her experience, the strongest leverage came not from resistance, but from relevance. She remained reliable. Steady. Invisible, but irreplaceable. And every time Vanessa stumbled, Rachel made sure someone else noticed. Not with gossip. Not with drama. Just with data. At first, the cracks were almost invisible. A mislabeled chart. A missed deadline excused as a glitch. A meeting cancelled last minute because of double booking. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than the chaos of corporate life. But Rachel saw it clearly, like water seeping through a hairline fracture in glass. Vanessa was slipping. Her ideas were still polished, her presence still loud, but her eyes had started darting more in meetings. Her jokes landed flat. She corrected her assistant publicly over minor errors, then apologized in Slack with heart emojis and exclamation marks. To Rachel, it all read like panic behind a forced smile. The interns, once excited, now cautious, rarely stayed past 6. One quietly asked Rachel if there was someone else to talk to when Vanessa didn't respond for 3 days about project feedback. Rachel didn't answer directly. She just nodded and offered to review the interns' numbers just in case. And when the interns' chart outperformed expectations, Vanessa took the credit. Again. But this time, Rachel said nothing. Instead, she added a new tab to her document. Misattributed work, April quarter. Meanwhile, Vanessa tried harder. More team huddles. More graphics. More buzzwords. She introduced a new dashboard system without consulting operations. It backfired within a week, data didn't sync, reports overlapped, and a major supplier was left without confirmation. Rachel had predicted it. Quietly corrected it. And waited. At the next department check-in, the CFO frowned at the numbers. "These don't match what I saw yesterday." Vanessa blinked. "They should be identical." "I'll double-check with my team." Rachel spoke gently. "I believe the template was changed mid-cycle. I still have the original files, if that helps." The CFO nodded. Please send them over. Vanessa didn't say a word. That afternoon, Rachel caught a glimpse of her through the glass office door, alone, leaning on her desk, her phone face down beside her. She looked like someone trying not to drown. And for a moment, Rachel felt something. Not pity. Recognition. Vanessa wasn't a villain. She was a woman promoted before she was ready, praised for confidence instead of competence, thrown into a role she couldn't refuse, and now trapped by it. Rachel had seen that happen to younger women before. Women who were told to be bold, to lean in, to own every room, until that room turned on them. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Because while Vanessa was flailing, she had chosen to climb by stepping on Rachel's back. And now? Rachel wasn't standing in her way. She was simply no longer holding her up. That weekend, Rachel visited her daughter and granddaughter. Lily noticed the difference immediately. You look lighter, she said. Rachel just smiled. Sometimes you don't realize how heavy something is until you finally set it down. They baked muffins, painted, laughed. And when Rachel left, she didn't check her work email once. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between two routine updates. Subject, Q2 Performance Review, Vanessa Green. Attendees, CFO, HR Director, Rachel Whitmore, optional. Rachel stared at the screen for a moment. Optional. She almost laughed. That week, tension in the department thickened like fog before rain. Vanessa walked faster, talked louder, and made erratic decisions, rewriting reports at midnight, triple-checking minor emails, second-guessing her own directives. Twice, she called Rachel into her office under the guise of collaboration, only to ramble through talking points and backtrack her own suggestions. She was unraveling. Rachel remained calm, professional, responsive. But beneath the surface, she knew. The center could no longer hold. On the day of the review, Rachel arrived early. She didn't bring a dossier, or a speech, or even the folder she'd quietly built over months. She brought only a notepad and a pen. Vanessa was already in the conference room, seated stiffly across from the CFO and HR director. Her blazer looked sharper than usual, her makeup carefully applied. But her eyes were tired. Her voice, just a pitch too high. I know there have been some challenges, Vanessa began, but we've made huge strides in our digital alignment and I've taken the initiative to streamline. The CFO raised a hand, gently but firmly. We've received multiple complaints from vendors about miscommunications. Intern turnover is higher than it's been in years. And several team members have raised concerns about unclear delegation. Vanessa flushed. I've been managing a transitional team. I inherited inconsistencies. I've had to compensate for gaps in experience, especially from staff who resist change. Rachel looked up, eyes steady. There it was, the final deflection. The room was quiet. Then the HR director spoke. Rachel, you've been with this department the longest. Do you have anything to add? Rachel could have said many things. She could have listed every error, every moment of erasure, every quiet act of sabotage she'd reversed just to keep the ship afloat. Instead, she took a breath and said, calmly, I think Vanessa was set up to fail. Vanessa blinked, stunned. Rachel continued. She was promoted too fast, with too little guidance. That's not her fault. But once in that seat, she had choices. And blaming others became her default. She turned to Vanessa. You don't need to be perfect. But you do need to be honest, with your team, and with yourself. The CFO leaned back, folding his hands. Thank you, Rachel. That's enlightening. The meeting ended without resolution. No firing. No fanfare. Just silence thick with consequence. As Rachel left the room, Vanessa called after her. Why didn't you bury me? Rachel paused. I don't need to, she said quietly. You've been digging long enough. That afternoon, Rachel submitted her notice, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She no longer needed to prove anything. Not to Vanessa. Not to Monroe Interiors. Not even to herself. She was done being the foundation that others built fragile thrones upon. And she was ready to build something of her own. Rachel gave 2 weeks' notice. No drama. No announcement. No goodbyes on company email. She simply scheduled a meeting with the COO, handed over a short letter typed on ivory paper, and said, "It's time." The COO, a woman barely a decade older than Vanessa, looked almost apologetic. "You've been the backbone here for so long. We hate to lose you." Rachel smiled. Backbones don't bend forever. They offered to make her a senior advisor. She declined. "I don't want a seat in the back of a room I've outgrown," she said gently. "I'd rather build something smaller that fits." Her last days were quiet. She came in early, tied up loose ends, handed off files. A few people dropped by her desk with coffee or hugs. One junior associate left a note that simply said, "You taught me that dignity doesn't require a title." She took home only one box. Mostly notebooks. Her old nameplate. A photo of her daughter, Lily, and granddaughter, both smiling with frosting on their noses at a birthday party. As she walked through the lobby one final time, the receptionist, barely out of college, stood and whispered, "We'll notice you're gone." Rachel paused. "I hope you also notice that you deserve better." And then she walked out. No applause. No eyes following her. Just the sound of her heels crossing the polished tile floor, like punctuation. 2 months later, Rachel sat at a corner table in a sunlit cafe, laptop open, eyes focused. She wasn't idle. She was consulting, quietly, selectively. Helping small businesses fix broken systems and mentor young women who had the fire, but not yet the footing. Her website was simple. Elegant. Operational clarity. With heart. Rachel Whitmore, independent advisor. Lily called one afternoon. "You sound different." Rachel leaned back in her chair. "Because I am." "You're happier?" "No. I'm free." That night, she wrote a final journal entry in the same notebook where she had first logged Vanessa's name months ago. "I didn't take anyone down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight with fire. I held my ground. I told the truth. And when it was time, I walked away." She closed the notebook. Outside her window, spring was beginning to unfold, slow, certain, inevitable. And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel tired at the end of a workday. She felt right-sized. As if, finally, the room around her matched the woman she'd become. Some women burn bridges. Some rebuild them. Rachel simply crossed hers, and never looked back. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about power reclaimed through silence, strategy, and self-respect. Rachel didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. She let her work, her wisdom, and her exit speak louder than any retaliation ever could. Now it's your turn. What did this story make you feel? Who do you relate to more, Rachel or Vanessa? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you connected with this story, comment the number 2. If it didn't resonate, type 7, we still want your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to EN True Tales, where Natalie shares inspiring, emotional, and unforgettable stories every week. Because some of the most powerful stories are the quietest ones.